A TED Talk. I mean, TEDx. Still, wow. Okay. So when I was asked to do this, I was terrified about not being interesting or engaging. So I went to see a scriptwriter, and he told me that I needed a hook. I wanted to talk about my journey into academia, but the scriptwriter hinted that that would be boring and self-indulgent. He suggested I use the Cambridge Analytica scandal as a hook, as a way to engage you, the audience. So I did. I wrote it, and I read it back, and it was shit. Then I thought, why am I seeking the advice of an expert? What makes his knowledge more valid than mine? And my answer, of course I went with his advice. Since childhood, I've been taught to trust people whose knowledge is better than mine. So here goes. In 2017, The Economist famously declared that data was more valuable than oil. A year later, the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke. Now, for those of you without access to a family member's Netflix account, Cambridge Analytica was a pioneer in a sinister field, harvesting people's personal information from Facebook to make political propaganda that directly triggers people's emotions. What were the political consequences, you may ask? Now, regardless of whether data has in fact become more valuable than oil, it has at least equal potential to be a dangerous political tool. Because information is made to target our hopes and fears, it becomes more difficult for us to distinguish between what is true and what is false. Meanwhile, Facebook refuses to fact-check information shared on its platform. Facebook refuses to fact-check information. And get this, more and more people, I think that's about 30% of people in the UK and about 40% in North America, according to some estimates, use Facebook as their primary news source. Political propaganda is nothing new, but what is new is the ability to target individuals directly, rather than a general demographic. We're no longer simply targeted as men, women, black, white, Christian, Muslim, straight, gay, bisexual, as conservatives or as liberals. We are targeted as Giulia, Raza, David. This is phase one. Phase two is preventing people from seeing contrary opinions. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what an echo chamber looks like. I mean the Facebook example, not us here listening to a TED Talk. Now, during the UK general election campaign, all I could see in my Facebook feed was Labour propaganda. I thought, yay, we can win this. No offense to anyone in the audience, not that you would take offense given the outcome. But the algorithms, they only allow us to see those views that are similar or like our own. Let's just say the election was a reality check for me. In this way, we are locked into the echo chamber. So how do we escape from this room? Well, unfortunately, I don't have 1 hour and 3 clues. All I have is around 12 minutes and 1 clue. Knowledge. Knowledge is supposed to be the cure for emotional and cognitive blindness. It is supposed to help us to navigate the world and make informed decisions. But those who consider themselves educated, rational, and above influence can still be easily manipulated. It is enough to present us with something that triggers a strong emotional reaction and fits well with our existing worldview, and we are blinded. So how do we distinguish between fact and fiction, between good and bad knowledge? Well, good knowledge is supposed to be born by academics. We call it evidence. We produce it, we collate it, we review it, and we communicate it. But evidence, or good knowledge, isn't exclusively owned by academics. Here's a picture of my partner. Although it may not look like it from his fatigued face, he is really into running. And when he runs, he doesn't just run. He reads about running, looks at nutrition for runners, he buys the best runner's gears, and he records himself through a magic watch and a special app so that he can compare and reflect on what worked and what didn't. He is approaching running scientifically. By monitoring his experiences, he can better understand and improve his performance. Now, an academic might call this evidence-based running. When I began my research on the relationship between evidence and policy, I obsessed about why evidence, aka good knowledge, doesn't play a bigger role in the shaping of policy. Now, in principle, evidence-based policy is a great idea. It allows for policies to be made based on the best available research, rather than on the interests, ideologies, or fantasies of a minority, a group with political and economic power. Do you think that policy should be based on evidence? Let's see a show of hands. Come on, don't be shy. Okay? Most of you do. I mean, it's an attractive idea, right? I too was hoping that, like a prince on a white horse, evidence would arrive and save everyone from bad policy making. But back in the real world, what I found really challenged my fairy tale expectations. I discovered that evidence is organized hierarchically. What this means in practice is that most TED Talks that you may have heard, including this one, would be here, right at the very bottom of the pyramid. Less valid, less important perhaps than meta-analysis or systematic reviews of randomized control trials. What this hierarchy also means is that the knowledge that you may have to contribute, your experience, does not figure. It's not even in the picture. It doesn't count. Sorry. Now, if I was to collect data from all of you, speaking on your behalf, then this could count as evidence because I'm an academic. Now, depending on the type of data that I collect, say, for example, the manner in which I collect the data, the way I analyze it, it would either sit near the bottom or near the top of the pyramid. In general, the smaller the sample size, the more narrative-based the data, the lower its place in the evidence hierarchy. Conversely, the higher the volume of people and the more numerical the data, the higher its status as evidence. If I wanted to push it further up the pyramid, I would write it in jargon. I would then accept requests from my peers to add in more jargon. And then I would put it behind a paywall. And behind the paywall is an echo chamber. The problem with hierarchies, well, there are many problems with hierarchies, but one of the problems with hierarchies is that they make us believe that people at the top are better than us and know more than us, and people at the bottom are worse and know less. So hierarchies are exclusionary by design, and yet they are the dominant form of social organization. They're often presented as natural, like, you'll understand when you're older, or he's a natural-born leader, or even, like many species of great apes, Homo sapiens builds social hierarchies. Valid arguments, perhaps, but like all arguments, and like all knowledge, they are partial. Yes, some apes can be violent and very hierarchical, but others, like the bonobo, are generally more cooperative and peaceful. So, who do we want to be like? The thing about us as a species is that we construct our own reality. So do we want to be hierarchical or cooperative in life and in the making of knowledge? For as long as we consider some knowledge as better than other knowledge, we will continue to create hierarchies, and these hierarchies will continue to foster exclusion. People who are alienated and excluded can become easy targets, especially for those who want to exploit their fears. Considering that we live in a time of climate change deniers, flat earthers, and creationists, the last thing we need right now is to exclude people from accessing and holding knowledge. And yet, here we are, still sustaining the same exclusionary hierarchies. Now, to counter this, we need to rethink what we mean by good knowledge and who holds it. We collectively need to create spaces that do not exclude any experience. While doing my research, I met many people with direct life experience of being at the receiving end of policies. To my mind, these people were experts by nature of their direct experience. But they were not given a platform because their experience was not considered to be valid. So people with experiential knowledge are excluded from the experts club. Now, expert and experience share the same root word for a reason. They are connected. But we live in a hierarchical society that divides experience from expertise. For people's experiences to be validated, someone with higher status needs to speak on their behalf. So the people whose knowledge is regarded as valid tend to be those with high political and moral status in society. So in criminal justice, which is my field, these are usually white, at least middle class, males, academics, policymakers, practitioners, law enforcement. People with low moral status, like people who use drugs, people who sell sex, people who are incarcerated, they're systematically excluded from policy debates. And this is despite the value of their lived experience. They are among the people most directly affected by criminal justice policies, and yet they have no voice. Now, I believe it is our responsibility to make room for these experiences to count as valid knowledge. Some of us are beginning to create the conditions for a kind of knowledge that is co-produced and horizontal, so that we can all be on the same level. And this is to counter divisive trends. If we have learned anything from the disability and gay rights movements, and from sex workers, and from people who use drugs, it is this. People are labeled and disenfranchised because of who they are or what they do. They are not granted credibility or legitimacy. But their stories, this is crucial, their stories are much more intelligible, much more accessible and relatable than pretty much any academics I've ever heard. They can trigger emotional reactions in people and empathy, something that many academics struggle to do. In my area of research, academics talk about investing in harm reduction policies. But how many people actually understand what this means in practice? An academic might say something like, the evidence for harm reduction is overwhelming. It is cost-effective and it saves lives. I mean, maybe some of you can relate to this information, but the level of abstraction is such that it will be difficult for many people to have a strong emotional reaction to this. One of my knowledge partners said that when he was younger, he was never told that taking ecstasy may result in him losing a tooth. Now, this would have been harm reduction advice that anyone could understand. Of course, these are two different levels of abstraction, but they are complementary. One piece isn't superior to the other. And let's be frank, we're not going to combat the rise of populism by boring people. If knowledge was more varied, more accessible, more engaging, more horizontal, could we counter the spread and appeal of false narratives? If we believe that all knowledge is complementary and none is superior, could we make some changes? Academics they can open access, they can facilitate inclusion, they can create platforms to co-produce knowledge. We can use jargon-free language to communicate. We can teach and we can learn outside of traditional classrooms. We can use different media to engage people. We can collaborate and partner with people who are routinely silenced. And we can defer to them when we know that they know best. We can recognize the value of all experiences and the emotionally engaging nature of people's stories as a powerful tool. If we make room for these stories to be on the same level and to count as valid knowledge, we can disrupt hierarchies and maybe even escape the echo chambers that are so damaging to our political futures. Okay, let's get out of this echo chamber now and talk to each other. Thank you.